You know, when we think of the American Revolution, we usually picture 13 colonies, all united, all fighting for the same cause. But the real story, especially down south, was way more complicated. In fact, there was one colony so divided, it was basically fighting a civil war inside the bigger war. And that colony was Georgia.
So that brings up a really important question, right? Well, places like Massachusetts were these hotbeds of rebellion. Why was Georgia, the youngest of all the colonies, so reluctant to jump on the revolutionary bandwagon?
Well, the answer really comes down to Georgia's very unique situation. It wasn't just another colony. It was doing well, it felt like it needed British protection, and man, was it ever feeling the pressure from its neighbors.
Look, the reasons Georgia was holding back were just incredibly practical. For starters, economically, a lot of folks were thriving under the Royal Governor, James Wright. Then there's security. They were on the frontier and they were really relying on British soldiers for protection. And to top it all off, they had their revolutionary neighbor, South Carolina, basically threatening to cut off all their trade. I mean, what do you do? It was a totally impossible position.
So all of this hesitation created this deep, bitter divide. The fight in Georgia wasn't just against the British, no. It was a true civil war, pitting neighbor against neighbor, family against family. The colony was literally at war with itself.
And this division basically split the colony right in two. On one side, you had the Loyalists, or Tories, led by guys like Governor Wright. Their motivation? Super clear. Let's just keep the peace and the prosperity we have under the king. But on the other side, you had the Patriots, who called themselves the Liberty Boys. They were definitely outnumbered, but they were fired up by all the radical stuff happening up north in the other colonies.
So, you might be wondering, how did this smaller group of patriots even get the word out? Well, one of their key tools was something called a broadside. You can kind of think of it as the 18th century version of a viral flyer. They'd print their calls to action on these big sheets of paper, inviting people to secret meetings to try and build their movement from the ground up.
Okay, so even though they were outnumbered, the Patriots desperately needed a win. They had to prove they were a real force to be reckoned with. And that moment finally came in a small but incredibly important fight, the Battle of Kettle Creek.
Picture this. It's Valentine's Day, 1779. A small Patriot militia, led by a guy named Elijah Clark, decides to launch a surprise attack on a much larger camp of British Loyalists. The odds were totally stacked against them. Just look at the numbers here. The Loyalists had around 600 troops. The Patriots? Significantly fewer. A direct attack was an unbelievable gamble, but it was a gamble that was about to pay off big time. The Patriots completely routed the Loyalists, and the impact was immediate. This wasn't just some military win. It was a massive morale boost. They captured supplies they desperately needed, they proved they could win in the backcountry, and it made heroes out of people like Elijah Clark and Austin Dabney, a slave who fought with incredible bravery for the Patriot cause. But the war in Georgia was like a seesaw, a constant back and forth of wins and losses. And after the amazing high of Kettle Creek came a truly devastating low. The fight for Georgia's most important city, Savannah, would end up being a crushing blow for the Patriots. So, a year before Kettle Creek, the British had already managed to retake Savannah. And this is a wild fact. That made Georgia the only one of the 13 colonies to be brought back under royal control after the war had already started. So the Patriots, now with help from the French, were absolutely determined to take it back. The plan for the siege seemed straightforward, but it turned into a complete disaster. For 5 straight days, French ships and Patriot cannons just hammered the city. But the shelling, it barely touched the British troops who were dug in, and instead ended up killing civilians. When the Allies finally launched their ground attack, they were met with overwhelming force and just easily beaten back. The cost of this one failed attack was just staggering. Over 800 French and Patriot soldiers were killed or wounded. That is a devastating loss for a single battle. Man, the British, who were defending from fortified positions, get this, they lost only 18 soldiers. 18! The difference is just shocking, and it sealed the defeat. Savannah would stay in British hands for another 3 years. And yet, even in one of the worst defeats of the entire war, these incredible stories of courage managed to emerge. The Siege of Savannah, for all its failure, actually forged this powerful legacy of heroes.
The heroes who came out of that siege were from all over the world. You had Count Casimir Pulaski, a Polish nobleman who was killed leading a cavalry charge.
There was Sergeant William Jasper, an American hero who died trying to reclaim his company's flag. And so importantly, a group of Haitian soldiers fought a heroic rearguard action, covering the retreat and saving countless Allied lives.
You know, this quote just perfectly captures the story of Georgia during the Revolution. It wasn't one colony with one single mind. It was a territory split right down the middle. You had the Patriot-held countryside in a constant struggle against these fortified British-held cities. It was a true civil war.
And all of this leaves us with a final thought. We often learn history as a simple story of us versus them. But looking at a place like Georgia reminds us that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. So how does our understanding of any nation's story change when we stop focusing on its unity and start looking at its deepest internal divisions?